Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Bradley, and I'd like to welcome you to the Her Impact Entrepreneurship Summit. I am pleased to represent 1863 Ventures, who is honored to be in partnership with the Ford Motor Company Fund to be able to host this summit. As we kick this off, I want to lay out a few ground rules and opportunities for you to engage. First, we encourage you to visit the website at herimpact.net, and we just put it in the chat. The second is for active engagement. I encourage you to use the chat. We know there's both a Q&A and chat section, but please drop your questions, comments, feedback, power bumps, fire signs, 100% logos, so that we know you're with us, you're engaged, and of course, at any and all times, feel free to drop in any questions that you may have. The final thing is that this is 2 days, so we are thrilled that you have joined us today, and we hope that you join us again tomorrow. Every day from 12 to 2, we'll be with you to help you and any other of your colleagues or friends understand this amazing world of social entrepreneurship. And I ask that you especially mark to join us again tomorrow because we have a special surprise at the end. This is a competition and a summit and a program that we have had the pleasure at 1863 to take all over the country. One of my greatest pleasures has been working with the representatives from Ford Motor Company, one of which you'll get to hear from right now. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Pamela Alexander. She is the Director of Community Development for Ford Motor Company Fund, which is the philanthropic arm of the Ford Motor Company. In this position, she's responsible for leading Ford Fund's community engagement and outreach initiatives with key nonprofit organizations throughout the United States. In case you didn't know, Ford has invested $1.5 billion in nonprofit programs and program initiatives that empower people and build communities. Pam, thank you for joining us, and I ask that you join us now to share your thoughts and excitement as we kick off yet another city with Her Impact.
It is an exciting morning. Good morning. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Melissa. I'm so happy to be joining you today and this great group of entrepreneurs and, frankly, ecosystem builders to launch the Her Impact Kansas City Entrepreneurship Summit. This past 15 months since the pandemic has started has been obviously some of the most stressful and challenging times of our lives. And we all know that women have been hardest hit by job losses, lack of childcare, and small business closures. And yet, according to the US Census Bureau, entrepreneurship is up among women. Out of necessity, because the timing is right, maybe both, women are starting their own businesses. And Her Impact is here to offer support and guidance to women social entrepreneurs in Kansas City. Her Impact is a joint venture between Ford Fund, the philanthropic arm of Ford Motor Company, and 1863 Ventures. And I have to stop and say thank you to Melissa and her team. You are an amazing partner, and we are so thrilled to be on this journey with you. But Her Impact, it recognizes the ripple effects that women-owned social businesses can have on their communities. The summit culminates in a pitch competition in which women pitch their socially conscious businesses to win financial awards. Since 1919, I'm dating myself there, since 2017, I'm not that old, Her Impact has invested $300,000 in women-led social enterprises and provided business development resources to more than 500 entrepreneurs in Detroit, in Washington, D.C., and in Miami, and now we're in Kansas City. This, of course, excludes just over the past 15 months, hundreds of thousands that have been invested in women-owned businesses in the form of emergency COVID funds. At Ford Fund, we are committed to assisting local communities with programming that is accessible despite the pandemic, especially to women who are critical in creating stronger families, stronger communities, and stronger economies worldwide. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time to join us today. Thank you for investing in yourself and our communities, and I hope you enjoy the summit. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's a pleasure to work with you, and we are honored to be a partner in this amazing program. Just to remind folks, this is 2 days. So the Entrepreneurship Summit is today from 12 to 2 and tomorrow from 12 to 2. And it's designed to build community and increase the capacity of women social entrepreneurs. Now, let me be mindful, this is open to anyone that is interested in entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship. But the pitch competition and the resources are here to really support those who are often overlooked the most, which are women in the entrepreneurial space. To get us started, I'm honored and thrilled to tee up our first panel, which is an overview and understanding of what the heck is social impact. And I'm honored and pleased to introduce our first member of the Her Impact Kansas City Advisory Committee, which is Jenny Miller. Let me take a pause and acknowledge that this would not be possible if we did not have local members on the ground who are helping us. So Jenny, thank you so much. We will acknowledge the other members a little bit later in the program, but thank you for being part of the committee and helping us frame this, and I'm excited to hear your conversation.
Thank you, Melissa. We're happy to be here today. So as Melissa mentioned, my name is Jenny Miller, coming at you live from Kansas City, KC SourceLink offices. So I'm watching the chat and seeing everyone coming about today. It's nice to see you or have your comments coming across in the chat field. I would like to invite our panelists to come join us. Connor, if you would like to kick things off and give a short introduction of yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you to the Ford Fund and Ventures, 1863 for inviting me to be a part of this. My name's Connor Hazelrig. I'm the inventor of the Sunshine Box and the founder of 1773 Innovation Co. And so we've been producing these Sunshine Boxes and delivering them all around the world. They're solar powered cell phone charger. And so we've been working on that to help bridge the energy gap that exists in emerging countries and also to help create jobs internationally.
How many countries are you in right now, Connor?
Yeah, so we're currently in 18 countries. So we just got to 18 last week, and we have over 100 boxes around the world. It's really hard to sometimes capture these impact metrics, but we've charged over 1 million phones to date.
Perfect. And next, Katie Mabry Van Dieren, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Katie's going to be joining shortly.
How about Tammy? Are you ready to introduce yourself? All right. Well, as they join us, we'll have them introduce themselves. And if you have questions as we're going through today, as Melissa mentioned, please drop those in the chat and I will try and keep that list moving so that we can answer those questions. Connor, you touched on this a little bit, but what does social impact mean to you?
Yeah, great question. And it's one that I've been, constantly debating back and forth because, you want to be able to measure the impact. And so social impact to me means the effect that one can have on communities and families. And so being able to relieve that burden for so many people through your work is how I very holistically measure social impact.
I see Katie just joined us. Katie, if you can introduce yourself and then in your introduction, talk a little bit about what does social impact mean for you?
Hi, Jenny. Can you see me and hear me now?
Yep.
Yay, so sorry. I'm Katie Mabry Van Dieren, and I am the owner and curator of the Strawberry Swing Indie Craft Fair, as well as Craft Show CEO and Shop Local KC. And I'm also the co-founder of Truce Market Collective. And I was actually teaching a class on entrepreneurship to students in Belarus, and it was being translated in Russian right before. Sorry, I was late. It was really cool though. So I actually talked a little about social impact to them too, because what I've done is built like a huge social media platform. Well, not huge. I think it's huge, but it's really not if you compare it to like Kim Kardashian. But I have used my social media platform for social impact and making sure that our community understands what it means to support local small businesses. And my thing is all about shop local and support makers and artists. And not only does that, help our people and our community, but it does help the environment, because then people aren't, big box stores, so much pollution with semi trucks bringing it to and from, planes flying, stuck in the Suez Canal right now. What? That kind of thing. So shopping local, it takes out that part of everything. You're really just, going down the street to your local craft fair. You can walk there. You're helping these people provide for their family and me provide for my family as a small business. So I've used my platform to shout out how big of an impact it has to shop local. And I've also used it in a political way, which a lot of people say, no, don't do that, but I have done it. And that's really impacted, I think, our community and social aspects of it.
Thank you, Katie.
Sure.
And I was just looking here. All right. As Tammy joins in, we'll have her introduce herself and kind of answer a little bit more about who she is and what she does as well. Katie, I'm going to kind of kick over to you, especially looking at all of the different endeavors that you have and the different brands that you have. How do you manifest social impact in each of those brands, and kind of what are some of the similarities, or what are some of the differences that you're able to utilize social impact in each of those?
I think that, because what I do is such an event-based business where people are coming together and gathering, it's very easy for us to see the impact it has, like visually with our eyes. It's a little harder for me to measure it digitally or data wise, because I don't charge to get into these events or anything. So the way that I measure our social impact, like data wise, is just by seeing how many people are interacting with us on the social media, how many people are attending these events. But I see it with my own eyes, and it is incredible. With the nonprofit I co-founded, who ironically, Tammy Buckner, who's joining us, is on our board, Truce Market Collective. That has been one of our biggest, hardest steps, I think, is figuring out how to digitize this data to show people our impact, because we see it. We were there. We did 6 Black Lives Matter murals recently on the streets of Kansas City through our program KC Art on the Block that my co-founder Chrissy Dastrup came up with and spearheaded. And we had 100 people during COVID, like in September, when we were all pretty worried about COVID. I mean, we're all still pretty worried, right? But back a year ago, we were really scared about it, and no one knew what was happening, no vaccines. We safely had hundreds of people at each site masked up, painting the value statement, Black Lives Matter. And seeing that and watching the videos of it afterward is just absolutely incredible. And that social impact, I feel like, is almost immeasurable, right? Because we saw everyone there. We know everyone saw it, and they're still seeing it every day. They're driving over it I live in between 2 of them, and I drive over that value statement every day. And that social impact of how many people in Kansas City have seen that, I think, is unmeasurable at this point. But I try very hard to make sure that, we take photos of these things we're doing, we have videos, and that we share our message with all of our followers. And I use my platform to talk about it as well. I am not afraid to stand up for human rights, and what some people may think is political, I think is human rights. So I make sure I talk about that stuff, even though people sometimes advise not to. I do.
And how does that come back and affect your business?
Well, sometimes, actually, right before this, I was teaching 14-year-olds in Belarus. He asked, and we had an interpreter, do I ever get negative feedback? And I said, I do. And it's only about the stances I take on social impact, like Black Lives Matter or LGBTQ or women-owned business. Like all of that, I get hit back on social media and complaints. And you know what? I don't erase those negative things. I don't delete them. I try and use that as a teaching moment, because for me, it's human rights. It's not an opinion, right? And so I explain why I posted what I posted. And then I say, thank you for your opinion. This is why I disagree. And for every follower I lose, I gain 3 more. And so it's worth it for me to have my voice heard for everyone else's whose voices can't be heard. And so honestly, with my event, there's really no negative feedback, because it's so fun. Like, no one really complains about the swing itself or anything. It's always about the stances I'm taking on my social media platforms as a craft fair. I can't tell you how many times people will say, you're supposed to be a craft fair, not a political thing. And I say, sorry, it's human rights doing, not politics. So we got to do all of it.
A little bit of everything happening.
Yes, for sure.
Connor, you have talked about the number of sunshine boxes that you have in the countries that you're in. What you do is all social impact. Your business is social impact. How does that come back, or how has that affected your business as you've seen growth?
Yeah, so I mean, as we're constantly working with more nonprofits, more groups, we're doing the same thing Katie's doing in terms of documenting this impact because, yes, we have a way to measure sales of boxes, if you will, and we're able to say we have this many boxes and we're employing this many people. But the true social impact comes from the stories of the people who have these boxes. And so when we travel, we try to document as many interviews as possible, as pictures as possible, because for example, as I'm talking to somebody who was literally in the eye of the hurricane of Hurricane Maria that hit Puerto Rico, and for her to have a sunshine box, I mean, she just broke down and cried because it changed her life to have just a small recollection of something normal when everything was gone. And so by being able to charge her phone and play a game on her phone, she found hope in surviving and overcoming what was about to be in the future of lack of infrastructure, nobody seeming to want to help. And so it's the same way of being able to, like Katie's doing, showcasing that work to others to bring more people on board. And I have to say, Katie, it's people like you who inspire people like me to not be afraid of saying and standing up for what's right. Because if we don't take stances on those social issues, then the power gap's just going to increase. And so I thank you for your work so much because it's very inspirational. And so, you and I are in the same business here of getting these stories out of the impact, because impact's more than money. Money, it doesn't go with you anywhere. It dies when you die, essentially. And so what's the point of that money? It's
Right.
changing people's lives. That's, so inspirational. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. I have to give credit to an amazing woman. Her name is Paku Her, and she is who taught me a lot of what I know when I was approached by my co-founder of Truth Market Collective, Chrissy Dastrup. She came in 2016, I think. She emailed the contact us section on the swing. It was like, hey, I would love to meet you in person. She lives behind this historic area on Truth that has been, divested in, and the buildings are empty. And could we talk about bringing the Strawberry Swing there? Yes, let's talk. I'd love to see, but I don't ever want to bring the Strawberry Swing there. I would love to talk about why that area is like that and why, how we can help people who are from, that area east of Truce. Why is there a barrier to entry to be in the Strawberry Swing? Or like, why is the Strawberry Swing not seem very diverse? Let's figure that out and then go from there. And so I didn't really know much about racial justice back in 2016. I grew up here in Kansas City, in Prairie Village, and obviously I'm a white woman, a privileged white woman. And so I had to learn about that. And Paku, she was a friend of mine and she joined our board with Truth Market Collective, and she taught me so much of what I know. And she said, because I felt, as a white woman, what do I have having any business, helping, or what I think is helping bring equitable space to truth. She said, if you can use your platform, you've grown this huge platform with people following you to teach them, that will be something incredible. And so she helped me be brave enough, I think, to use my platform and speak out about what I know is right, So I have to thank her a lot. She taught me a lot of what I know, because for me, sometimes I'm a little spicy and I want to argue back. And it's hard not to, especially when people are saying really horrible things. But I've learned that you can't get through to people that way. I also attended SURGE meetings for a while, which is showing up for racial justice. And it's white people teaching white people how to be anti-racist. And they gave me a lot of points of how to speak to people you love and people who you care about things like racism and why it is there and why we are privileged and why that doesn't mean we have everything and doesn't mean you weren't raised in, on food stamps the same. It's just teaching people what it means.
How do you balance that? Balance the social impact with as an entrepreneur, the need to make money. Where is that line? And how do entrepreneurs know when and where to draw the line between profit and social
impact? Oh my gosh, that's a really good question that I deal with all the time, because I am making my money and supporting my family through Strawberry Swing. That's my for-profit and craft show success and stuff. So I seek out an equitable way that I can have makers and artists pay me so that they can make tons of money at my events. And so that's been one of my biggest kind of getting in my headspace. Like, I know that I could probably make more money, but I want to be equitable for everyone. I haven't really been able to seek out as many sponsorships as I want because I'm so dang busy. But I know that I could relieve some of that, pressure on makers. But we're kind of like a big community, so it's all a big pot that goes back out. But if I could get more sponsors, that would be helpful. If I could reach out to people who already have money to give to something like my organization, that would be great. And that is how Chrissy and I have built True Market Collective, the nonprofit. Neither of us are paid. We're board members along with, Tammy and everyone else. So we've raised funds strictly on sponsorships of businesses that have made it and want to give back to people like us, but we're a nonprofit. My for-profit business is not a nonprofit. So to get sponsors for that, it's more like I have to show them why I'm valuable for them. Like, why do they want to attach their voice to me? So that is something that I do. I have kind of a little kit where I will say, our reach is huge. We've gained this huge following. These are the kind of people who are in our demographics. They fit your demographic. Give me a little bit of money and we'll all benefit from it. So that's kind of what I've figured is the best way for me, is to have big organizations that have already made it help us out and help all of us make it. I don't know, Connor, if that's the same with you.
Well, I have to say, Katie, you brought up a really good policy point. So one of my guilty pleasures is politics and policy and all of that international law type stuff. And your point about having to have a for-profit and a not-for-profit brings up this whole issue of, as social entrepreneurs, we have to pick either bucket. We can't be always in both. And so, talking about policy reform around how companies can be organized to see those same type of tax benefits when they are doing social goods. And there's been a little bit of reform, but I feel like there's still so much room to go. And obviously I don't have all of the right answers. I just have opinions based on my experiences. But I think you bring up a good point about being able, to not have to choose and to see the same benefits based on how your articles of organization are incorporated. For me, it's essentially, I've had a full-time job outside of my social impact job the entire time I've done it, to help fund myself, my expenses, and the things that I find important, including my business. And so we are registered as a for-profit because I feel like after I went through the entire research of not-for-profit, for-profit, that it would essentially be easier to switch from a for-profit to a not-for-profit than vice versa, or to incorporate a not-for-profit underneath our umbrella. And so honestly, as a young social entrepreneur, I took the easy route and said, this is how I want to do it. There's less legal issues that I could have, essentially from the documentation, the board members, all of the requirements that nonprofits have, but I could still have the same impact as a for-profit. And so for me, it's been, how can I run this business to create the most impact for others? And so when I think about designing products that would generate money for my company, it's not focused on what's going to make the most money. It's around what's going to create the best solution for the need in the communities that I'm serving. And so I'm not sitting here redesigning products every single day unless I hear that there's a need for something new. And so the innovation process around creating products that make money is so completely different for my business. And it's just kind of one that I have to evaluate, almost every single day, just to make sure that, I can sustain the business from my full-time job, but then also still provide that impact that I'm so passionate about in my social impact job.
Connor, as you are going through some of the pros and cons of looking at for-profit, nonprofit, and balancing everything that goes on between sustaining you and yourself and then your social impact, are there any key things that you look for, or words of wisdom that you can give to other attendees today that maybe could help them navigate this gray path really a little bit easier?
Wow. Honestly, like right now, understanding yourself is such an important thing. I don't know if I have necessarily like quotes that are words of wisdom that can help people, but to go into a social impact business, you have to have grit. Like you have to be able to overcome all of the things that are going to be thrown your way, much like how Katie gets negative comments on Facebook for posting how she believes facts should be laid out. And I totally agree with that. And so you have to have grit. And so you want to evaluate yourself before you jump in so that you're prepared to do something like this. And make sure you're doing it out of a place of passion. Otherwise, go into a for-profit business that's more corporately focused. That doesn't mean you can't still have some type of corporate social responsibility aspect. And so really, reflect on what it is you want to do and how you want to get there. So that's honestly, Jenny, the best type of advice I can give. And talk to other people about it. Ask them questions about how they see what you're doing on a greater scale. Because doing it by yourself or finding others to help you can make a huge difference when you think about doing it long term. And you can probably tell from Katie's bio that she's brought so many great people together to probably continue to help push her message and also support her when things probably get really tough.
Finding your tribe and building the community around who you are to help support. I like that. Thank you. Tammy has joined us. Tammy, if you could please do an introduction of who you are, and since our session is an intro to social impact, what does that mean to you?
Hi, thank you so much. Hi, my name is Tammy Buckner. I am the co-founder and CEO of We Code KC. What social impact means to me is providing resources, providing the training and the necessary upkeep to different organizations, to communities, to residents, to upskill, to motivate them, and to encourage them to, in regards to, being a better person, being a better, having better skill set.
Thank you, Tammy. Just a reminder to all attendees, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. We're encouraging everyone to be interactive through the chat function today. Tammy, an interesting question that we asked a little bit ago that I'm going to address to you right now is, what is the cost of social impact for your enterprise?
Oh, wow. Priceless. I can't even, there's impossible to put a number on social impact in regards to our space. That's definitely a hard question, but I would have to almost just say priceless.
Can you share with us an example or a story of someone that has been impacted by your business and what that looks like? Absolutely.
So We Code provide various technology training to the urban core of Kansas City and our youth. Many times and oftentimes I talk to young people, whether they're seniors or juniors in high school, that are not interested in going to college or may not even have any idea of what they would like to do when they graduate from high school. When I talk to them and expose technology and how it can impact their life, how it can make a change, and how it's a lucrative income or can be a lucrative income for them. And when a child comes back to me and say that they've changed their mind, that they can see themselves being in technology, they can see themselves actually working on computers, that's how I feel that it's impacted. I have impacted them because I've been in a space where I was the only minority. I was the only woman, specifically woman of color in technology. And that literally, and most times that pushes women away from technology. That is one of the main reasons why women get out of technology, because the culture, they don't see anyone that look like them. They don't feel that anyone in that space relate to what they're going through. It may be even a case that they weren't able to be promoted. And so they literally get out of technology. And I want that to be I want to make that different for not only our youth, but other women of color, that they see people that look like them and that culture surrounds them. So I feel that is the specific example that we can show the impact that we've brought on others in this space.
And we had kind of talked about this a little bit, and one of the questions had to be was about legal structure and talking about S corp, B corp, for profit, nonprofit. Can you talk to us a little bit about your structure and why you chose that?
Yeah, I chose a nonprofit structure in a sense because, as a for-profit, you can always obviously bring in income, and you can do the same, obviously, but for nonprofit. But at the same time, when you're able to have the resources and able to create a nonprofit arm so that we can provide those same services at a either no cost or low cost for our residents. Sometimes you can see coding classes that may be $20,000 up or $30,000, but then when you can create a nonprofit arm and give those exact same services and the quality of services for very low cost to allow other people to get involved, that was the specific reason why I selected a nonprofit, because I can provide those same exact services and allow not only our young people not to have to pay to get into exposure to technology, but now we can move it up to our young adults and women that they don't have to pay for these classes to get the same type of training.
Perfect. And each of you have what I would consider fully integrated social impact into everything that you're doing. For those attendees that are listening today that are entrepreneurs that are maybe looking to bring social impact into their endeavors, how would you recommend they go about doing that? Let's start with Connor, maybe.
So just to make sure I understand this, you want us to help the people on the call here to understand how to get into social entrepreneurism?
Or how they can incorporate social impact into their business model.
Oh, I mean, there's so many ways. I could get super excited and probably talk for hours about this because you just think about every single aspect of your business. So I'll kind of give you a few examples of how I thought about it beyond just what we're putting into these communities. So from a procurement standpoint, making sure that we're sourcing ethically good products and that we're not purchasing products from countries or companies that might have acquired those products through unethical standards of children labor or conflict minerals, that type of stuff. You can also think about the companies that you partner with, making sure that you are doing that due diligence to make sure that their values, their mission, their products align with yours, and making sure that everything comes together to show that the impact that you want to have meets the standards and values that you hold true to who you are and your company is. And really just thinking about when we put this product, or even if it's an app or any type of service out there, making sure that it's responsible in the way that it's delivered. Thinking about how you're targeting the audiences, thinking about what dilemmas or feedback, and not necessarily feedback in terms of opinion, but feedback in terms of what happens because you put this out there. For example, we started to notice as we were putting sunshine boxes into different rural communities in Haiti, in the Dominican, in these countries, that people were collecting payments for the electricity in cash. And so then all of these agents operating the box would have pockets full of cash, which made them targets for robbery. And so it made me stop and reflect and think, how do we change this? Because I made this product to help be a solution. It's not the solution, but be a solution to this problem that is now have this negative feedback on these people, the people I'm trying to help. So I have to do something to fix that. Otherwise, it's going to continue to cycle as a problem. And so we've been developing a text message payment system for the box so that these agents who operate the box can receive that money in a secured payment system that can't be stolen. And so thinking about the impact of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and who you're doing it with are just three of like my very top favorite ways to talk about how you can incorporate social entrepreneurism in your business or even in a company that you work for.
Tammy, do you have to add to that?
No, I think she said exactly, what I was going to add. I mean, because, when you're thinking about making sure that you have any type of not only just resources, but a product that will impact an organization or impact people in a whole, making sure that there's the lowest cost of barrier. But I think she hit, most of that right on point. So yeah. And then making sure that there's relevant culture and any type of, conviction around that, whether it's a small group, whether it's a large group.
When you're looking at culture around that, what are some things that you look at, Tammy?
I look at probably making sure not only do our teachers, our mentors, our volunteers align with our residents or align with the people that has signed up for our classes. And we have a wide range, not only, men, women, Black, white, Latino, Hispanic. And that's one thing that I love about our organization, that it's not just specific. We make sure that social impact or social economic does not hold a barrier against, allowing people in our sessions and program. It's wide open. We may say that it's, that we are geared toward urban core, but it's wide open. And the important part of that is when you see a child or a youth sitting down next to someone that has even been in the space of coding or been in the space of technology, and then you have someone that does not, and putting those two together is just like pair programming. I mean, me being a software developer and I'm not understanding certain things, and I can sit down next to another developer and start working. That's the exact same with youth and kids. They don't see color. They don't see socioeconomics. They see nothing but another child their age doing the exact same thing that they're trying to do, and they're collaborating. And that what makes, a social impact so powerful when you're sitting kids down, because they don't see any of the barriers, any of the culture that we see. They don't see it.
I think that is so true.
Mm-hmm.
You are looking to bring new students into your programs.
Yes,
how do you advertise what you're doing, and who are you advertising to?
We normally advertise basically online, any type of social media, but projects and spaces such as this allows us to get the word out. It allows us to show that we are not the typical nonprofit where we close our doors to other. We are wide open. So when I talk with people, I normally have on my We Code t-shirt that is normally, showing who we are. But I am so thankful for the sponsors, for our advocates. So many people share the word about We Code, and I really appreciate that. Because, not saying that we're the only organization that is out teaching code, because we're not, but I am just thankful for the advocates that are out there sharing about what we do. So I do appreciate that. And it's really referral and word of mouth.
Perfect. Katie, we'll round out things with you today. How can entrepreneurs incorporate social enterprise, or how can they look at moving forward and incorporating social impact in their entrepreneurial endeavors?
I think by partnering with other people who, they look up to and are already implementing social impact in their businesses, that's one way that I also do it. Myself, I make sure that the people I partner with, the venues I go to, anything like that, that it is someone who has the same values as me. And Tammy, you probably know this, on our board, Truce Market, I remember we were going to get some money from someone one time, and I'm like, should we take money from them? And they're like, yes, Katie, it's fine. But like Connor addressed that earlier, making sure that you take partnerships, sponsorships, money from people who align with your vision and your mission and your social entrepreneur impact. And sometimes you got to take money from other people too, if you're a nonprofit. And our board said to me, hey, if they're going to give money to us, let's take their money, because we can use their money to make a difference with it. And so I would give advice to up and coming entrepreneurs to just make sure you get in contact with people who you look up to, ask them, to teach a little bit about, because sometimes you can say the wrong thing and there's no going back from that. So, make sure that you've done a lot of research, read a lot about what you're passionate about, know what to say and what not to say. all those kind of things. And make sure that what you believe in your heart is, I really do speak from my heart most of the time. And I think that's why my brand has been successful, because people feel that I'm authentic and that my business is authentic, and that we really put our, money where our mouth is. And we are going to support local community members 100% of the time. And then I also try and teach why that's important. So make sure as an entrepreneur, you teach everyone why your mission is so vitally important and why it has social impact. You know what I mean?
And I know
hopefully we can get some
last
closed
question.
captions. I was seeing in the comments that people are looking for closed captions, and I'm trying to figure out how I can turn them on me. But that is another thing that I would like us all to think about. When I had my grand opening, or my soft opening on my brick and mortar last week or 2 weeks ago, I had some non-hearing ask me if I could have an interpreter there, because they wanted to hear what the mayor said and know what the mayor and I were saying. And I hadn't thought about that because I'm a hearing person. And so I said, heck yeah, I will. And so I found a sign language interpreter, and she was there to interpret what we were saying at the ribbon cutting. But I personally had not even thought about that. And that is something we all need to think about. I don't know how to put closed captions on, and now I'm realizing that, and I need to know that. So hopefully this will be recorded and we'll have closed captions afterward, right?
I think they said that in
That's
the
what I
chat.
saw.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. That's good.
And so I know I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more, because each of you talked about this a little bit. When you are looking for partnership or you're looking to source products, you all mentioned doing research and making sure you are aligning with other people that have the same goals and impact as you. Do you have any certain tips or, I guess, tricks, for lack of a better term, on how you go about really digging in to make sure that they do align with who you are and what you're doing?
I guess I can start. Honestly, it's going on. For me, it's been going onto their website, talking to the people in the organization, understanding what their values are. To be quite honest, I've turned down partnerships with nonprofits and even customers who wanted to buy boxes because my values did not match with theirs. Faith organizations are a lot of organizations I work with because they're so prominent in the humanitarian aid industry. And so, if I'm working with a church group or a faith-based organization who has very strict guidelines on who they support, how they feel religiously, that don't align with how I feel, or I feel like aren't as inclusive as they should be, I don't partner with them. And my lights are about to go out here again. Sorry about that. And I've been engaging in partnership discussions to the point where somebody has said something that's been like, whoa, yep, nope, we're done. Like this is over. And so really being able to, when you make those decisions, stay true to who you are, because if you lose who you are, you lose the impact. And the impact is what got you in it. And entrepreneurship's hard. So don't let, your thoughts think, well, passion's going to keep me going. It's about staying true to who you are and your mission. So do as much research as you can. If you're partnering with organizations, honestly, look at the entity organizations online. Use every single public database you can. And that's just my gist of how I go about that process.
I totally agree with Connor, making sure that they are aligning with what your mission and what your values are, because if you don't, you start losing yourself, you start losing your organization. And at the same time, making sure that your foundation is set. I've had to turn away partnership because there were things that I needed to do for my organization and making sure that it was solid before I started creating those partnerships. It's so important that, I have my structure and my infrastructure in place before I start rolling out or partnering with other people, because now I start losing what We Code is all about and what our mission and our values are. So you just have to make sure that you do your due diligence. You have to make sure you do your research about that organization. And then most importantly, who you are as a foundation yourself. You have to be solid in what your terms are, before you start rolling your program into others and partnering with others.
And one last thing I want to say to that point, Tammy, is, for the people listening, if you get into a position like Tam and I both have, where you might have made a bad decision or you've got too far, don't feel bad. Keep going, keep pushing. You're going to find other organizations.
Yeah.
Don't give up. I mean, we all make bad decisions and we all make what we consider mistakes, but it doesn't mean that it's end all be all, right? Learn, take what you've learned, apply it to the next one. I mean, entrepreneurship's an experience in itself.
Yes.
So
It is.
I just wanted to make that quote as well.
100%.
Definitely is an experience.
And Katie, did you have anything to add?
Oh, I agree with everything they both said. It is so true. If you make a mistake, please don't give up, because I've made many, many mistakes and there are learning experiences, and being able to admit that you made a mistake and learn from it. That is I think that in itself is also immeasurable, because we all make mistakes. We have to be honest. And nowadays, we have this call out culture and all that, and like everybody makes mistakes. And so, being able to learn from them and also, try and teach people. Like one of the things about partnering with, people who may not seem outwardly aligned with you, you can also try and teach them. So I would much rather partner my organization with someone who may not have learned everything I've learned, but maybe they would be a great person to teach. And so I'd rather them partner with me and I can get in and teach them than them partner with someone who already feels exactly like they feel and they're never going to change. So that's one thing that was a little rough and hard for me, because I learned all that through Surge, that showing up for racial justice, that there are some people that you can teach and help learn why their opinion is just that. It's an opinion. It's not a fact. And there's ways that we can teach that in a way that everyone will understand that we're talking about human rights issues and that kind of thing. So not just looking at the face value of what maybe someone says on social media or something, meeting them, talking to them, and gauging from there.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I am looking forward to the rest of the next 2 days and hearing what everyone else has to say for this conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
I am. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, ladies, so much. Thank you, Connor, Tammy, and Katie, and Jenny. Special thank you to you for moderating that amazing panel. Let me do a couple of housekeeping things. We apologize for the lack of captioning. We are working on it. At the very minimum, we will make sure that when we post the video and we send out the link to this recording that is closed caption, and we are working hard to find a solution for tomorrow, but our apologies on that. There were so many nuggets and gems that were dropped. I know Tammy got an amen and all kinds of high fives for talking about the fact that part of impact is not just the environmental benefits, as we heard from Connor, but also the impact that we have with each other in building community. And as we know, that's pretty hard. It's also, as alluded to the conversation, very tactical and oftentimes needs some support to figure out how do you really put a frame around those impacts. And so I'm honored and privileged to introduce Professor Anthony Lupino, who has been an awesome ally, another amazing member of the advisory committee for Her Impact Kansas City, to bring us the panel on measuring and tracking impact. Tony, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to pass it to you to introduce your amazing panel.
All right, thank you very much. And I will do that. I think one of our panelists is being joined into this Zoom in a minute. So we are going to talk about measuring and tracking social impact. It follows nicely from the terrific session we just had. That was great discussion. Just a brief aside that popped up in the chat. Several of the speakers talked about organizational forms for ventures that have social missions. And several of us involved in this panel and others have studied this quite a bit. So nonprofit forms, for-profit forms, and the recently emerging hybrid forms for social ventures. You may have heard of low-profit limited liability companies and benefit corporations and so on. And so we've had workshops, had a seminar every year with the Kauffman Foundation for several years about just that subject as one of the modules. So if anybody is interested in some material on that, I'll put my email address again chat, and I'd be happy to send you some materials and converse with you about that. And so would I'm sure other members of the panel. They've asked me to do some very just brief introductions. I think you'll hear more about what they do during the discussion that will start in a few minutes. But we've got three terrific panelists, all of them social entrepreneurs in their own right, but all of them also facilitators and supporters of other social entrepreneurs through their various positions. So we're going to hear from Evan Absher, who's a senior program officer with the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, Adrienne Haynes, who's an attorney and businesswoman, and among many other positions, is the founder and leader of Seed Law, which is a law firm that serves entrepreneurs in our community. And she's also the owner of the Seed Collective Consultancy. And David Renz is a professor emeritus at UMKC, where I work in the law school at UMKC. David is with the Block School of Management. He's the director of the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership in the Department of Public Affairs at UMKC. So three terrific panelists. We've got about 4 or 5 discussion questions, and in each case, one of the panelists will lead off with a response to the discussion question. The others are encouraged to jump in. We've talked about that, so everybody should feel free to do that. And again, as Melissa said, please use the chat function. I'll try to keep an eye on it so we can get questions on the table, as will the 1863 team. So let's start with the threshold question of what are some of the reasons why it's important to measure and track social impact in entrepreneurial endeavors? Evan, you want to start us off on that?
Would love to. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone in the panel preceding us. Just fantastic folks. So thanks. I think from a lot of different perspectives, there are a lot of reasons why you want to track your impact, but I think, as I was spoken about in the panel before, it's important to kind of know yourself and set the narrative and use that as a way to communicate to your different stakeholders, be it investors or customers or partners, what you're about and how you're going to achieve it, and having clarity around that. And so somebody who funds nonprofits and for-profits to do social impact, social mission, social oriented things, it's very helpful to have the person doing the work set the narrative, set what success looks like, set the objective, because otherwise everyone will set it for you. They will impute what they think should be happening. They will see what they want to see. And without clear metrics and how you're going to measure that and how you're going to tell that story, it's going to be difficult for you to, as an entrepreneur, I think, to really sort of control the objective. And we see that in mission drift with nonprofits, or we see that with bad partnerships with for-profits. And I think that's a really crucial piece of why you should measure impact.
Others on the panel?
I would just toss out one of the old cliches that I think is relevant to what Evan had just said, which is begin with the end in mind. To the extent you don't have clarity about that, it undermines the coherence and, frankly, the efficiency that you can have down the road. Now, you can be overly narrow about that, and I don't, as the previous panel pointed out, let's learn along the way. But having that end in mind, even though you may need to refine it and change your understanding of it down the road, is critical. And we'll talk more about pieces of that in a minute, I guess.
And Adrienne, who are some of the stakeholders in our measurement of social impact? Who wants to know?
Sure. So when I was hearing your introduction and thinking about my own journey as a social entrepreneur, I had the opportunity to run an incubator here in Kansas City almost 10 years ago. So when I was running that program, of course, it was done so with the heart of social impact And at that time, I would say with the framework that I had, the number one stakeholders I was thinking about were the clients of that incubator, so the business owners. But now, and based on some of the work that I've done through the Kauffman Foundation Innovator Residence Fellowship, I had the chance to apply a systems thinking approach to even my thought about who are the stakeholders. And I think that they're, when we think about stakeholders now, I'm thinking about it in a more broad sense. And there are a lot of different ways to define systems thinking. We can have a whole session on it. But for me, it's just the awareness of the role and the interconnectedness of the systems and the structures in which we live in as a community. And so for business owners, when I think about stakeholders, that's your ecosystem. So really at Blue Hills, back in the day, our stakeholders were our business owners. They were the neighborhood residents that lived right around Blue Hills. They were those that were coming to teach, and it was the wider construction community. So I think when for social impact and stakeholders, you may have a project specific work that says, here are direct beneficiaries, but I think it's important to kind of widen that lens and remember that it's your direct beneficiaries, your community members, your pre-existing leaders, of course, your funders. And I think when you have that framework and that perspective, it does allow you to stay on point with your mission and avoid that mission drift, as Evan mentioned. And then ultimately, I think when we have the systems view of our stakeholders, it allows us to have these, the core competencies of systems leadership across the board, which are one, the ability to see the larger system. So not only the people that you're working with, but also those contributing to the ecosystem. The capacity to foster reflection and more generative conversations, because even in that exploration, you realize there are more stakeholders than even you initially may have set out for. And then finally, it allows everyone then that you're working with to this ability to shift their focus from problem solving in this reactive measure to co-creation of the future. So it's a long answer about stakeholders, but I believe that, the umbrella of who a stakeholder is also can be quite broad. But I do think, when you are clear about the impact that you want to make, you can be clear about who are our primary stakeholders and really kind of develop your program around them.
Okay, so let's get into a little bit of the how of measuring and tracking social impact. So David has studied this and taught this in workshops. And so David, could you tell us a little bit about techniques you've seen or seen others use to measure and track social impact?
Sure, be glad to kick this off. And it's the kind of thing where there are lots of different perspectives, and our colleagues on the panel certainly have other thoughts as well. One of the things I'd like to highlight, I guess, is that there are sort of layers to impact and to understanding, both layers in terms of what might be considered impacts, and also then a sequence or phasing to what you actually want to do in terms of tools and techniques. Frankly, I suppose it relates to I didn't connect it before, but to this begin with the end in mind. I think one of the particular elements that's important to understand is that there are layers of impact, and ultimately, the big picture phrase social impact tends in my world to be about serving a broad community, a broad set of constituents and stakeholders, and a very large long-term impact. But there are levels back, and the jargon phrase in our work is logic models. The notion of a logic model is that when you are engaged in a venture, social venture, nonprofit of any sort, excuse me, you can talk about the inputs. They're important to understand. For some social problems, that's what people actually talk about. An illustration of that is when people talk about student-teacher ratios in education, that's a measure of inputs. How many students, how many teachers, things like that. Being more substantial then is to go to the next level and say, well, what are the activities that are delivering the value when those inputs come together? So you've got that kind of measure, which by the way is still not impact, but it may be an important step to sort out on the way. And so that might be how many courses did we offer, or how many students did we have in the program, or whatever that might be. The next layer in logic model thinking is, and when you complete those activities, what are the shorter term impacts? The jargon in my world is outputs. You can call it whatever you want, but it's the short-term impacts like, hey, the students ended able to code this or to read that or whatever it might be. Longer term, even from that, is what we often call outcomes. And the longest term outcomes are community impacts or system impacts. And the distinction between outputs and outcomes is that outputs over a longer period of time yield outcomes. And one of the easier ways that I think about it is you can talk about teaching kids to read as they're going through kindergarten through 12th grade. The outputs are being able to end each grade level able to read at that level. But ultimately, the impact is students who can graduate and read and participate, viably in communities and society with that larger point. So you've got that thinking through from that perspective. But I do want to talk a little bit about capturing the information too, because the second part of this then is to go out and actually gather information and think through, well, can I collect information on outputs and outcomes? Candidly, in social impact, it's often hard to do that. So you have to work your way back a bit. But, try to sort it out. What can I collect in the way of data? You're going to know the inputs, you're going to know your activities, and then, close the loop and just think about, well, what difference did it make? And so collecting data regularly along the way. Now, how do you do that? It really depends on your venture, because ideally you're surveying and interacting with your clients, your participants, and others so that they're able to tell you what their experience is and whether it feels okay or not, whether it seems to be working or not. Over time, I think it's important to gather other data. And it's interesting, in some fields, in some areas of impact, you can collect a lot of that data indirectly, or at least you can collect data that's partly indirect. I work with a social venture. It's actually a Canadian group, but it's working in the US as well, that's designed to help nonprofit boards grow and develop. They have an online system for boards to do self-assessments and try to grow and develop. Well, the great thing is, by the way, the woman who is the entrepreneur who created this, Yvonne Harrison, figured out early on that it's run through an online platform. So it's capturing data from all these users. And so she's actually capturing output data, even if they don't have the sense, but by the way, she tries to encourage them to, but even if they're not using the data themselves, she's looking at and running aggregate data from time to time. And that's my last point. I'm sorry to talk so long here. The other layer of it is then over time, create some kind of a dashboard, or, some people talk about so-called balanced scorecards. The problem is they're often so complicated that people get caught up in the methods and lose track. But the idea about a dashboard is, sample the same data over time and track how well it's doing. And frankly, go back to what both Adrian and Evan have said so far, communicating back to your constituent community. How are we progressing? How's it working? And so you've got trend data, which, by the way, might make you feel better if you say, well, geez, we only got 5 people helped this year. But, it's kind of like, well, so then second cycle, we get 12. And beyond that, it's even 20 or 50 or 100. I encourage people to try to get creative about that community impact notion. But, start with what you've got. Start with what you can do and work with the realistic part.
David, there was one question while you were speaking near the end there. And let me see if I can, it just jumped a little bit, but I'll pull it up here. The question was, is there methodology built in that you can talk about to some of that data collections, particular methodologies that are easy to come by?
Well, there are methods and techniques that in general you can use to evaluate program impact. By the way, Tony, you mentioned earlier some of the things we teach. At the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership, for several years, we hosted a series called the Aaron Levitt Social Venture Challenge. And the Levitt Challenge, the Block School put it on hold this year, but at the Midwest Center, we have recordings and resource materials from all of the programs we've done over the last 8 years. And so you can go online and download those things. So by the way, you've got a little graph, a table that's a logic model and some other things like that. The thing that's a challenge in some respects is that what methods you use depends fundamentally on what it is you're trying to do. If you're trying to measure kids' progress at learning to read, it's necessary but not sufficient to look at the activities and say, well, 28 kids came through the program. I mean, one of our worries in a lot of education today is 28 kids went through the program, 5 of them learned enough to really move to the next level. So at risk of sounding overly vague, Tony, it really depends on what you're trying to do. I loved one of the observations, I love a lot of observations from the previous panel, but I do want to flag something that was said earlier, particularly about, it's not about the money. And, candidly, a lot of entrepreneurs track money, but it's really a scorecard. It's not like, Warren Buffett doesn't need all the money he's got, but Warren Buffett still tracks his numbers. And it's partly, in fact, he says it's substantially because it's his sense of how am I doing? Now, I think he's also a little competitive about, I'm doing better than everybody else. But so there are methods. Sometimes statistical methods are a good way to go, but it depends a lot on what it is that you're working on. And some of the toughest issues of social impact are extremely difficult to measure. And so you want to, frankly, at the times you're doing that, I think going back and using basic methods like surveys, trying to use indirect measures where you can. Candidly, in today's Survey Monkey world at UMKC, we use something called Qualtrics. You can gather some pretty basic information. One of the things I would suggest, and again, this builds on a previous comment that a few panelists have made, don't just talk to the people who are in the program, talk to people who actually might be knowledgeable about it. I mean, candidly, to go back to the kids example with reading, don't just talk to the kids and don't just use standardized scores. Talk to the parents. How is it going? And what's happening or not happening? And does that have an impact on the value you're offering?
Excellent. And so the question that was asked and your response, I think, lead nicely into our next question. What I was asked in the chat, or we were asked, was, is there a methodology to measure social impact? And I think the answer is there could be several combinations of methodologies that need to be tailored to the particular venture. And as we were talking about that in our, the 4 of us getting ready for this panel, I think the notes I wrote the most were on the words design thinking, learn, and adjust. And I think that, and one of the things I think, David, you said was often we hear people describe design thinking as an event, but instead it's really a process. And so, Adrian, I think a question for you, and then I'd like Evan to jump in as well. How do you recommend your fellow entrepreneurs go through a process of developing their social impact metrics and make that an inclusive kind of co-design process?
Sure. David, I thought that answer that you gave was spot on, because even in my experience, the Innovator in Residence Fellowship. So what we did through that program is we created a community innovation design model. Now, there are a lot of smart people before us who have done this work, created certain frameworks. So we took the time to listen, we studied the frameworks, and there's a common framework called the 8 Capitals of Wealth that the Aspen Institute put out. Well, for our project, we shared that framework with our community. And at the end, we actually identified 10 capitals of wealth that we were going to use in our framework. Another thing you all might see, I can barely sit still thinking about data because it really is exciting. You're always going to have more learning than you can even possibly capture. And so I encourage you to be mindful of that and to also be listening not only to your stakeholders, the wide variety of them, but also to the learnings that are just emerging from your program. I'm really beginning to, the question is, how do we develop these social impact metrics? And the first one may be basic frameworks, but over time, through that listening and making design thinking that process, you end up with proprietary methods that you have created over time by listening and really being responsive, to the communities that you work with. So I think it goes back to a point that has been made about making sure that you're defining success for the specific region that you're working in, taking that systemic view, and making sure too that you're articulating your learnings back to the stakeholders. As facilitators and organizers, and I still feel like this about the program we ran, super successful, 3 communities, and there's still, I feel like I've barely debriefed the tip of it. And so there's always going to, take good notes, make sure you're recording things so that you can too go back over time and really continue to distill those learnings, because based on different stakeholders, they may have different priorities too. And so, I think setting benchmarks as you're learning and making sure just to implement that regenerative change so that your program is as innovative as the clients and constituents that you're working with is what I would recommend in terms of not only setting, but developing those metrics over time.
There were several key points in that. One of them that resonates particularly well, I think, is that you really need to make sure that the stakeholders stay involved and informed. One of the worst things that can happen is if you tell folks you're going to get their input and they don't know what happened to it. This is more of an active co-design process. So Evan, I know you in your positions have to do a lot with setting outputs and outcomes and trying to figure out how that relates to impact. And I also know that you've taught me quite a bit, and you've been learning a lot about data gathering and data analytics. So how about your perspectives on some of this process approach to coming up with a good design?
Yeah, I think everything that's been said before is, I think, really all aligns really well. And I'll just extrapolate it kind of based on my experience as a funder. The outputs and outcomes is the framework we use, the foundation. It helps us think rigorously about the project and strategic alignment and all of those things. And I often spend the most time on those aspects of any grant that I do. Is I really focus on the outputs and outcomes and make sure that it makes sense to both the program and the foundation strategic goals. The thing I always try to do with them is I try to make them as part and parcel of what the grantee or vendor or whoever we're engaging with would be doing anyway. I don't want to create erroneous metrics that are proxies or aren't or forcing something additional to the work they're already doing. And so I push really, really hard internally and externally to say, are we doing something that is this indicative of something you do anyway? Are we pulling this out of an operation that already exists within your program anyway? So that's one thing. And I would say, like, in a broader conversation, as I've sort of gone through this now almost 6 years, seeing the panel and seeing the folks who are on this call, I think, and as a cisgendered straight white dude, I want to tell everybody that nobody has the answers, including the giant entrepreneurship foundation. We don't have the answers. And so whatever you feel like speaks to what you think your impact is, give voice to that, because there isn't a secret room filled with answers and knowledge. And your viewpoint and perspective as the entrepreneur, as the program person, or whatever, the person on the ground doing the work, is the most important perspective. And you should never feel like what you have to say or what your truth is or what your experience is wrong. And so make sure you manifest that in your outputs and outcomes, and you say, these are the things that are important. And if it doesn't align to Connor's conversation about partnership, it doesn't align, and that's better to figure that out. But I oftentimes, run into folks that are really excited about potentially getting, a grant from us or something, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get the grant. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I think they're just excited or whatever. But it's much more important to recognize that your truth is real. And so, to that point, I think, like, even very, what I'll call foundational, fundamental, or primitive, I don't know if that's an appropriate word, but it can be very powerful. Simple can be very powerful. And I think simple is okay. Rudimentary, what may seem like rudimentary metrics or rudimentary measures of outputs and outcomes might seem silly, but that actually can be very powerful than convoluted, complicated, right? And to Dr. Renz's point, the impact might be very difficult to measure. And so we have to proxy something. And that's something else to keep in mind. And those are all sort of important things to keep in mind. Real quick, I think one book that I really enjoy that I send to all people starting an initiative is The Lean Startup. I haven't read it in a while, so there might be a more up-to-date version. But in that, the entrepreneur describes how they sort of develop, how they understand the product market and what the market needs and how their product fits. And they literally just go out and ask. It's not fancy. They're constantly reframing their perspective and their a priorize, and they're just out there asking. And what's funny is they're building this tech company, but behind the scenes, it's literally, there's no technology. They're presenting as a tech company, but they're doing everything manually by hand at first. And what I think the important lesson from Lean Startup is, you see this highfalutin, cisgendered white tech bro who's got this thing going on that you think, oh, is so savvy or whatever. But in reality, he's very open about how he began his journey, which is asking people questions directly in a grocery store or wherever, and doing things manually with almost no tech behind the scenes. And I want to encourage everybody that is a very common reality, and it's okay to own that. And it doesn't mean you're not worthy or onto something or executing well. It just means you're starting on a journey, and that's okay. And that's legit what everybody else is doing too. Everybody else is just kind of piecing it together. So I think all this conversation, it might seem like the metrics are this giant put together thing, and it's not. It's really just about what's your truth. And then finally, the data piece, I don't know. I mean, we could go on a whole panel, but I think there's just a large issue with connecting data and operational and evaluative style, which is what we're talking, to social science data. And what I'll say for this panel is, when you are working on a problem as an entrepreneur, be it for-profit or nonprofit, there is some research. Maybe more issues have more research than others. But there is work on it already somewhere. Somebody's thinking about it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Go out and do the research on this. Delve into it, become an expert, understand the research, really dig into that, reach out to people, and allow the people who are researching this to help you form your perspective about what is important to measure. And I think that can be a really good starting point as far as that is concerned, because your funders are going to be theoretically reading the same research if they're interested in the subject. So that's a really powerful way that I think digging into the research, understanding what the social science are saying or the hard science are saying, and getting into that. I mean, again, referencing Connor, her background is in this. She knows the research really well, and she's an entrepreneur that pivoted from her background in engineering and physics and science, and probably some level of research of understanding of photovoltaic and all of that, to knowing how to measure success and build the product. So that's one thing I would really say is don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. There's somebody out there who's researching that. Use that social science, tap into that. And then the follow-on conversation is, how do we connect programs to the larger data? But we won't go there. There are other folks dealing with that.
Well, we got a few minutes left. I'm going to go to our last question. But Evan, there was a question you might answer in chat if you're so. It was can you give a particular example of an erroneous metric, maybe a pet peeve you've seen? So you can think about that while we move on. So the last question I think goes like this. One of the energizing things about working with entrepreneurs generally is the combination of creativity and passion. And with social entrepreneurs, you can just double that or some other multiple, but not everything goes according to plan all the time. And so the question we'll end with is, what can entrepreneurs do when the social impact is less than desired, less than they envisioned? And so, Adrian, why don't you start us off there? And then if everybody could maybe contribute a little bit to that, we'll wrap up our panel and see if there are any questions.
So I think, to reiterate the point that we've been making, there will always be a lot of data that you're able to track, and setting a success metric doesn't always mean that you're going to hit it. I think with your funders, it's about being honest about that, and also just tracking that information so that regardless of where the impact falls, you have some sort of handle on it, because you're going to have some sort of regenerative program. That's the nature of social impact. And, to Evan's last notes, I was noticing, from what he said, I've met Eric Reese, who wrote The Lean Startup. He's an entrepreneurial guy. And when we think about social impact and social entrepreneurship, we have to remember that it's still boots on the ground entrepreneurship. Your final client may be a little bit different, but it still requires that hustle and that really kind of listening that it would take to also run a for-profit entrepreneurial venture. And then two, when we're thinking about social impact that's less than desired, to Evan's point about creating a program that really articulates your voice and the voice of your community and beneficiaries, that's really like doing a PhD. A PhD, you're using the research that already exists in the field, and your goal is to try to contribute a new voice and to see something different between the lines and to contribute some new thought to your industry. And I think it's the same for social impact. From the very beginning, you should be thinking, here's at least what I want to contribute to the market that I see as a gap or a service or an impact or metric that I can provide. And then you just find the right partners, get the right people on your team, and really try to argue your point for the benefit of those that, your research is on. And so sometimes saying that, I'm an entrepreneur through and through. So failing fast is a part of almost everything that I've done. And so being able to just kind of reinvent those metrics through your learnings, I think, is a part of the work. So yeah, social impact less than desired is normal, but usually, there's multiple metrics that you're kind of tracking your success on.
David, your experience?
I'd like to add to that and bring up what may seem counterintuitive, which is unintended impacts. And by the way, that's relevant positively and negatively. Part of my pitch would be go out and gather some data that's not just in your system, go downstream and find out how are people experiencing what's going on. I mean, candidly, in this era of inclusion and more importantly, equity, one of the critical questions is how is it actually being experienced more fully in the community you believe you're serving? And there's some great programs that were bright ideas that didn't bear fruit, but actually they did have other impacts that were positive. Whether they were worth it or not is another question. That's an investor's question or maybe your question. By the way, I do want to go back to one thing that Evan just said a minute ago. You need to be willing to tell folks that, especially if they're organized philanthropies or governmental funders, they're going to tell you what outcomes they want you to achieve. You've got to be willing. I think the first panel said this, but I want to underscore it. You got to be willing to walk away. Now, that's really hard when you got nothing but a quarter in your pocket. I get that. But the reality is, it needs to be yours and your communities. Now, you got to figure out the community, and that's where the design thinking stuff comes in, because, how are people experiencing what's happening? But be open to knowing the unintended consequences and impacts. And by the way, if they're great, cheer with everybody about it and grow them to the extent they're not great, to the extent that they're exclusionary or they reinforce biases or whatever else. I mean, let's have deeper analyses and thinking about that and build that into the next generation. I mean, one of the things that both Adrian and Evan have talked about is that lean startup stuff. By the way, there's, for the for-profit world, there's the lean canvas, which is a big page that you sketch stuff out. For the social impact world, there is the quote unquote social lean canvas. And it just adds two more layers because it starts with the assumption that you need to define the problem that you're trying to work on. But, ultimately down the road, let's figure it out. One of the programs that came out a long time ago that never delivered on its promised impact was DARE, the drug abuse resistance education stuff that was playing out. By the way, DARE is still out there in a lot of places. One of the things that was fascinating was it kept getting funded by people, even though it wasn't actually changing drug abuse, substance abuse problems very much. Why did people even support it and fund it? Well, actually, it did have some positive benefits in some communities with regard to community police and community police kids relationships. So it's kind of like, what? This is something we cared about. We just didn't draw it into the picture to begin with.
Evan, I saw you nodding approval vigorously there. Anything to add before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think as I said I think focusing on 1 to 3 things is really important. And as a funder, I have made all the mistakes and metrics. I have all the erroneous things I put in there. I have done. This isn't me casting dispersions. I'm telling you. I think that the thing I would keep in mind when you're doing metrics is everything we've talked about has come to getting to the heart of what you're trying to do, instilling rigor and discipline into your thinking, and allowing you to communicate what you want to do to yourself and to others clearly. And then using all of that to understand if you're achieving that operationally. Those are really, really important things. And I think really helpful regardless if you're for-profit or nonprofit. And so that's where, as a funder, we come from. But as a social entrepreneur, I found very, very difficult and takes many iterations. You're not going to find it on your first whack. You're not going to get there right away. You're going to have lots of mistakes you're going to learn. So that's okay. Again, it's okay. And mistakes and struggles are what everybody goes through, and it doesn't delegitimize you. It doesn't make you less than. And that's something that as institutions, we have to work on personally, that we have to instill in ourselves, that failure to meet outcomes is not a failure of the program, but maybe it was just a failure of our assumptions going into it. And that's the final thing, is just own those. You're actually better than you were before if you made mistakes. I generally don't. I feel better about engaging with people who have I've done this and this and this and this, because I know they at least won't do those things.
Right. Well, thank you all. I've had the good fortune to have been learning from all 3 of these panelists for many years now, and I thank them for sharing with us again today. So thank you, Evan and Adrian and David. And I think we're right at time here. Hope we didn't run over too much, but thank you all.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Tony, Evan, David, and Adrian. So appreciate it. You can tell by the chat, people loved it, and we love resources and tools. So we're going to try to go back and capture some of those so that we can get those out in email. And I want to echo what Carolyn said, an absolutely amazing session. I want to just check in on a couple of things as we tee up our next panel. As we mentioned, that the whole purpose of this is to be able to support female social entrepreneurs. And obviously social entrepreneurship, as we just heard, is a relatively complicated and sometimes overcomplicated segment that we tend to see people involved in. And so we really hope that this summit helps to kind of demystify some of the challenges. And I also want to note that the reason that we focus on women social entrepreneurs is because too often they were overlooked. We know that women are a vital component of the economy. We know in the business sense, including both traditional for-profits and social enterprises, we're talking about over $1 trillion in contribution and revenue through their businesses. And so we know that women are often the primary economic drivers in their communities. We know that statistics show that whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, women-owned and women-led firms have higher levels of financial performance compared to exclusively men-owned firms, which I'm sure many of us already knew, but I think it's important to note. And we also know that anecdotally and statistically that women's leadership leads to increased innovation. So the summit is certainly open and we welcome everyone, but we have a very specific focus on a pitch competition supporting those women who we know oftentimes do not receive money. On the venture capital side, we know they're less than 3%. And if you're a woman of color, it's even less than that. So love the conversations that we've had. Love what we're learning around what is impact, how to actually do it. I think that's the biggest challenges that we see and hear at this time. And so now I would love to be able to have a conversation with an entrepreneur, with someone who has actually gone through this. And she's not just any entrepreneur. She's actually an entrepreneur who was originally not from DC, but came to DC and was one of the winners of the Her Impact Pitch competition that we had here in DC. So I want to thank her so much for joining, and I want to welcome you, Stephanie from Please Assist Me. How are you?
Doing well, Melissa. How are you doing today?
Awesome. It's always a pleasure to see you, and we track you. We have our own metrics for their program, and we know that you are doing well. But first, let's just get started and tell us a little bit about your business, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so Please Assist Me was birthed, obviously like most businesses, out of a personal problem or personal need that I experienced. And so I was working in corporate and quickly climbing the corporate ladder, but found that the better I did at my work, the more I started struggling at home. And it was the never ending piles of laundry and the sink full of dishes. And, coming back at the end of a business trip and just not feeling in control of my home environment. And I really started diving into a lot of my female colleagues that had children were starting to have to choose whether they wanted to focus on their career or focus on their family. And no one should be forced to kind of make that choice. And so that was kind of the impetus behind starting Please Assist Me and it kind of creating a solution so that people can manage their homes, from one point of contact. So that's what Please Assist Me does, is that we provide an all-in-one home management app for people to manage everything from groceries, laundry, dry clean, running errands for your son's birthday cake, all of that handled through one all-in-one platform.
Awesome. Well, I obviously took moderator privilege because I asked you a question. I just want to take this chance because you've been doing some amazing things. And I want to invite our moderator, Lauren Conaway from Innovate Her KC, to join us to take over and answer the questions. But I also hope that at some point in time, you'll also talk about a little bit about the pitch competition as we bring Laura on. And for those entrepreneurs who are watching who want to be able to apply and be a part of it, what are some pieces of advice you'd have for them?
Yeah, so obviously my first advice would be to apply. I think a lot of times we let fear get in the way and hold us back from actually stepping out and trying something that would obviously be beneficial for your company. And so, there is no necessarily being too early or too scared. I think it's, if you have a great idea, to go ahead and apply. And then obviously, to then really, really work hard on preparing your pitch, because your company is only as good as you can explain it. And that's something that we really dived in and focused in on. So those would be my two pieces of advice.
Awesome. Well, I am more than happy to pass you off to much better hands than my own, which is Lauren Conaway of Innovate Her KC. I know we were looking for you and we were looking for Lauren, but there you are. So before you start, Lauren, why don't you give us a little bit about Innovate Her KC? We're proud to have you as part of the advisory committee team for Her Impact KC, and I'll let you all take it away in the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, hi, and I do apologize for the naming convention. I have renamed myself, and now we know who I am, but I'm Lauren Conaway, founder and CEO of Innovate Her KC, and Innovate Her KC is a 4,300 plus member women's leadership community. And, I've been extremely excited to be a part of this particular event with 1863 Ventures and Ford Motor Company, the Her Impact Summit, because we have so many just change agents and catalysts activating in the social impact space. And so this is a topic and a conversation that is near and dear to my heart. I've been taking notes the whole time and throwing nuggets out there in the chat because I'm so enthusiastic about the conversation that's taking place here today. But I am extraordinarily excited, even more excited, to talk to Stephanie. And I think anybody who has been involved in the social impact space knows that there is this delicate little dance that leaders within this space have to operate within. We have to kind of straddle the line between impact, creating change and helping as many people as possible, while still focusing on that financial piece. How do we keep the lights on? How do we make enough money so that we can grow and scale and reach more people? And so that's what I want to delve into a little bit today. But thank you so much, Stephanie, for taking the time. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yes, excited to talk as well. I have a Kansas City will always be in my heart. The first startup that I actually worked with, that I was employee with, was eventually bought out by Cerner, and I worked with Cerner based there in Kansas City for about 2 years. So very familiar with the area, and so nice to kind of circle back.
Well, at some point, if we have time on the back end, I'm going to ask you about your favorite barbecue, knowing that is a very polarizing question.
Oh, no, I'm not even going to jump into that.
No, I opt out. Pass. Well, all right, then I won't ask you that, but I will ask you this. So I'd like to know, you told us a little bit about Please Assist Me, and I think that is such a really fantastic business model. But the first question that I want to ask you is, talk to us a little bit about how you have balanced creating impact within your community, for your residents, for the, buildings and the communities that you work with. What has the journey been like as you have tried to balance that impact piece with that financial piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for us is there are companies that do similar things to what we do. I wouldn't say exactly what we do, but a lot of it is focused on the gig economy. So, not paying the people that are doing the work what they're actually worth, and then obviously not providing necessarily or guaranteeing high quality services on the back end. And so, from an impact standpoint, we see it from two ways. One, we get the moms that are screaming, "You're helping me be a better mother. You're helping me to stay engaged." Really bringing work-life balance. And I think a lot of times people, oh, it's just home chores. But what we don't realize is that burnout is at an all-time rate. And women, unfortunately, especially with the pandemic, we're seeing that they're having a hard time re-entering into the workforce because of school from home demands and just other things that go on, and we're kind of wearing that brunt. And so anything that we can do to kind of level the playing field for everyone by taking over those home responsibilities and family responsibilities and life management responsibilities is a step in terms of social impact. So that's one way that we view it. But the other thing is, way that we view is actually the PAMs, is what we short for Please Assist Me. The PAMs that we service. And so the PAMs right now, 100% of our PAMs are either female or minority. And we really pride ourselves in providing W-2 dedicated work in this gig economy space where we pay our people amazing living wages, and we provide a workplace for them to not be able to grow, but also have flexible hours. So a lot of our employees work part-time hours, but it's dedicated. So they know, okay, I work every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. So, I can have someone pick up my kids from school those days, but I can then be there on Monday and Wednesday to kind of take in and step in and kind of need that flexibility. And I think there's a big demand, in today's workforce where people are looking for flexible but dedicated jobs, but they want to be treated not like an employee, not like some disposable, asset that other gig economy companies kind of lean into.
For sure. Well, and I love what you're saying, because I think that there's a little bit of hidden subtext to what you're saying. I think when people think about social impact, they tend to think about like, oh, somebody is creating a product, like Connor, who has the Sunshine Box, or somebody is, doing workforce development or something like that as a part of their business model. But what you're talking about culture. And you're creating a culture in which your employees are empowered to thrive. You're creating an economic opportunity, but you're also creating culture where people who maybe previously wouldn't have had the time and energy to focus on their own endeavors, they now get to turn that energy outward to create change in their own way. So you've got this little win-win-win microcosm that you're building here, and I love that. So talk to me about this, because one of the struggles that I'm just going to share a little bit, but Innovator, one of the big struggles that we have, one of our focuses is low barrier to entry. And so I want to do everything for free. All of our programs, all of our events, like everything for free. Everybody gets to come because we want to help as many people as we can. And so when you're talking about when you're talking about setting prices and creating revenue models, what did that process look like? Because you wanted to be able to capture as much business as you could. You wanted to be able to help as many, residents as you could, and you wanted to be able to hire as many people as you could, I'm sure, because that's where you're creating impact. But what did that revenue structure look like in your early days, and has it changed?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, really quickly, that's a very hard dichotomy, because a lot of people will focus on one in detriment of the other. So either focus on providing amazing experiences for their clients and not necessarily provide as much as they can for their employees, or the same vice versa, where they might provide amazing employee experiences, but charge, rates that only a certain subset of America can enjoy. And so I think for us, Please Assist Me, we had two goals. We wanted to create a very equitable and amazing place for people to work and to find dedicated work. And I think a lot of times people in the services industry are overlooked. And then two, for us to be that personal assistant for the 99%. If you are a 1%er, you have a personal assistant that kind of handles everything for you in your home, but that luxury has been not available for the 99%. And so we were able to do that. And to your point, made a pivot very early on where we partnered with apartment buildings who were more than willing to pay a fee for us to come into their building. They use it as a differentiation strategy, but then we're able to pass on those cost savings to our residents. So, you know, for instance, you can have our cleaning start at $32 for, you know, a common area clean, or if you want your groceries delivered, it start at $5. We're still able to have amazing profit on that, you know, because we have that kind of interim piece with the apartment that subsidizes those visits on behalf of the residents. And then obviously we can then, you know, pay our employees appropriately. So I think it's just being, you know, innovative. You know, we've heard comments all the time, well, you can raise your prices, let's make that 30, 60, or, you know, whatever it may be. But a lot of our apartment complexes are in opportunity zones. And in those apartment complexes, 20 to 30% of that complex is on affordable housing. And so we wanted to make sure that not only could we service the people that are paying full rent in that community, but also the people that are on affordable housing in that community. And we're able and happy to be able to offer our services in a price point that they can afford as well.
Sure. Well, and I think one of the again, there's that subtext that you're talking about, but you're not really, you know, explicitly saying, is the fact that the apartment complexes, I am sure that they're just like, take our money, because you are helping them attract and retain residents. So you're helping them, you become a value proposition for them, in addition to the clients that you serve.
Yeah.
So again, you know, you've created a system by which everybody wins. You know, you get to keep the lights on, and you get paid. Congratulations. That must feel nice. You know, you have folks who get the a lot of people think of, you know, house cleaning and people to run your errands for you like that's a luxury, but people who would have not otherwise been able to access that, they can now avail themselves of your services. That's just super cool. So I want to get tactical with you for a second. I want to hear a little bit about your journey, and hopefully, you know, the folks watching or listening at home, they're going to be able to take away some gems. But when you were figuring out your revenue channels, your distribution channels, you know, the way that your business model was going to work, and you were drilling down into the financial aspect, were there any tools that you used, or were there any, I guess, methodologies? Like, did you do any benchmarking against competitors? What were some of the systems that you used in order to figure out, this is our price point that is accessible enough so that we can reach more people, but it's also useful enough that we can, and sustainable enough that we can stay in business?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing, a lot of people, there's methodologies, you can write up a whole lot of stuff on paper. We did surveys, there's, you know, the lean model canvas, there's a lot of things that you can do, but you really don't know for sure what is up and down and left and right and what's going to work and not going to work until you actually try it out. So, sure. You know, a lot of people are like, well, I have this idea, I'm going to work on it in secret, I'm not going to tell anyone. And then, you know, boom, I'm going to, you know, kind of release it. I would say, you know, when it's considered perfect in your mind, it's probably too late to release it. So I was the first Pam. I set up a quick website, found some people in the community, and just got hands-on very early about how do things work? How do I get started? And in that kind of hands-on feedback, you get that immediate feedback. Okay, this pricing, you know, works. This pricing doesn't work. This service offering works. This service offering doesn't work. Oh, we stumbled upon an apartment complex. Oh, this might actually be a thing. So then we kind of, you know, it pivoted our strategy. So a lot of times, you know, in research and due diligence, I'm the biggest one to advocate for those, are important. But there are just some certain things that you're not going to know and understand until you actually get out and test the solution and try it out and get that real-time consumer feedback. Because people say they might pay for something, but you don't actually know until you put you require them to put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, you know, often consumer behavior is very different from consumer feedback. You know, there's a chasm between the two. And so I love that you recognize that. And I love the fact that you know, it's a constantly iterative process. Like, we're going to throw it up against a wall, see what sticks, and we have to remain flexible and adaptable enough to be able to change and you know, I guess innovate in what we're doing, innovate internally. Really quick, I just want to remind folks at home, if you have any questions for Stephanie, please pop them over into the Q&A or in the chat. I definitely want to ask her a couple more questions, but I would love to see some audience questions for the work that she is doing. So Stephanie, I want to ask you this is sort of a broad question, but I want you to brag on yourself for just a little bit. Like, can you tell us a story about about the economic impact, how that has positively changed someone's life. It could be a client, it could be a Pam, it could be, I mean, hey, it could be you. But talk to us a little bit about that. What does that look like?
Yeah. The initial thing that comes to mind is our PAMs. The service industry, especially a lot of the people that handle our cleaning, it's a tough industry, and it was hit really hard during COVID and just the pandemic as a whole. And so we were able to reinvent very quickly and provide a lot of delivery options, grocery delivery, laundry delivery, prescription deliveries, and provide that dedicated work, and also continue to hire. So we grew over 600% within the last year. We were able to provide jobs during that time for people that were let go from their normal hotel cleaning or airport cleaning or whatever they're doing before jobs. And, once we hired them on, amazing people with amazing stories, and families found that, some of them ended up being homeless or really undergoing some deep financial struggles because of the pandemic. And so to be able to be a resource to the service industry when a lot of people were hit very hard, just reminded us that we were in the right direction in terms of impact.
Okay. Well, that almost brings a tear to my eye. So I think we're almost ready to head out from a timing perspective. If somebody can, okay, 3 minutes, there you go. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Melissa. So my final question to you is, has there ever been a time when your focus on finance strategy, figuring out how to make money, how to keep the lights on, has that ever been difficult? Has that ever created difficulty for you as you have looked to fundraise and seek investment and build this business?
Yeah, I mean, I would say being a female African-American founder is already difficult to raise capital. And then you add to that we are a social focused business, just adds even more complexity. And so I just remember second guessing, should we switch to 1099s, or, should we, stop doing this? Should we raise our prices? Because it would make this certain investor happy. And it really made me stop and say, do I sell my soul for the investment? And I think, to be honest, a lot of founders come to that point where you realize, it'd be very easy to get this money to say what this person wants to say, but then it would be departing from the company's values or, what we stand for. And we stood our ground and thankfully stumbled upon amazing investors who support what we do, who, financially back us, and we're definitely on the same vision. And I would remind people that, investment and taking on investment, if that you choose, and let me say that that's not for every company, and it's very important to understand that. But if your company is one that you are going to have to move forward and take investment, it's important that you choose the right investors, because you're going to be married to these people for life. Yes. And I have seen so many companies get in bed with the wrong people, and it definitely bite them in the butt later. Some of them were kicked out of CEO. Some of them, have constant struggles with their, with their board. And so I would just say, it's very important. If someone can't buy into your vision from a social impact standpoint, from an investment standpoint, then they're probably not the right investor for your company. And that's going to come out later. And so if you can find people that are aligned with your values and what you do, then you'll find the right investors for you.
Absolutely. So Innovator, very early on, we had a pretty significant investor come in, and they asked, they were like, here, take this wad of cash. And, that was a very sexy thing. I was like, ooh, this would be transformational level money for us. And ultimately had to say no, because it was an organization that it didn't align with our values, and in fact was almost in direct opposition to our values. And I just pictured myself like, in 20 years, when I look back at this moment, will I regret it? Mm-hmm. So definitely, I love that's the lens that you view it through. Your investors are partners, and you have to have a common goal and a common vision, even if you don't agree on like all of the minutia all of the time. Yeah. So I believe we are at time, and I just want to say, Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I've been looking forward to this all week.
It's been a pleasure as well.
So
Thank you both, ladies. What an amazing, amazing conversation. And Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. You were awesome. I think I'm going to turn over my job to you, maybe. And Stephanie, congratulations.
You're amazing.
Thank you for all that you've done, and congratulations on all your success. So this wraps up day one. So if you liked it, you were intrigued, you learned something, then please go tell your friends to join us tomorrow, same Her Impact KC time and place. We learned a lot of great information today, and particularly as it relates to social impact. With what is it? I think it's a term that's overused and people oftentimes don't understand. We also learned and understand how to actually do it. I think the best thing I heard was simplicity is best. We have tons of matrices and tools and frameworks, but the bottom line is, as Stephanie so eloquently said, what works for you and what actually makes sense for your business. And I think what you heard from our last two folks is that while there's a correlation between running a business and making it viable and making it scalable and getting investors, there's some things you just don't want to compromise on. So I really appreciate all the gems that were dropped today. Please join us tomorrow. We will talk about the pitch competition, so you definitely want to come back for that. We're also going to talk about fundraising. So this was a perfect segue of hearing from Stephanie to talk about fundraising with Davin Gordon. And then we're also going to have a discussion around developing your impact business model with Andy Stoll. So really excited for that. The one thing I want to make sure I cover before we go away is that, as I mentioned, this would not have been possible without the amazing advisory committee that we had in KC. So I want to thank Lauren. I want to thank Maria Myers, Jenny Miller, Bob Martin, Adam Arredondo, Anthony Lupino, Andy Stoll, Kara Hoover, and Gwen Grant, Heather Hall, Jeanette Pringer, Davin Gordon, Laura Moore. And if I missed anybody, I apologize, because I know there were so many other people, particularly folks at UMKC, who also helped out with this. So join us tomorrow via Zoom, and then we will see you hopefully in Kansas City in the fall for the pitch competition. So thank you all to the speakers. Thank you all for the attendees. Enjoy the day. Stay safe and stay sane. Take care.